Welcome back for the third installment of Conversations from the Underground, new
Sir.
podcast experiment we got going on. Which, if you're just now tuning in, hopefully you'll go back and check out the other episodes. But we begin with the conversation, just a random conversation. We do not know what the topic is going to be beforehand. Our goal is to hit a nice 5 minute mark or so, just chopping it up. And then from there, we decide where we're going to go for the next 55 minutes,
Minutes
60
or
minutes.
so.
Yeah, before we then stop and pick a quote of the day that we think reflects a lot of what we've been talking about. So I guess we can hit it. What's going on with you?
It's the end of the week. I'm looking forward to relaxing. Luckily, I don't have any grades in front of me. Got some things around the house I want to take care of, man. Looking forward to some fights. Last
Mm.
weekend was a big UFC fight week, and it was exciting. I enjoy um, the UFC because of the pageantry of it all. You
Mm.
have fighters from various nations around the world representing not only themselves but at times sometimes the sentiment of their country, and then they bring it together in the ring, and so that's always cool. I enjoy the fights.
You think UFC is a sport or an art?
UFC is a sport, but they utilize martial arts, so it's an art in that they're utilizing components of what people would argue as a lifestyle, but by and large, at the end of the day, they compact it into rounds. They compact it into minutes. When I think about art, I think about it being a reflection of like a person's constitution, or it's a reflective of a lifestyle. That's how I look at art. Now, art doesn't have to be consistent, meaning that, my art style when I was 10 ain't my art style when I'm 20. We can switch it up, but it's still a reflection of my person. Whereas a sport is finite and it's more reflection uh of the parameters. Whereas art, I think, tends to definitely stay within parameters, but some of the most controversial art tends to go beyond those parameters. Art
Mm.
tends to push an envelope. It strokes conversation. It requires criticism and debate. Whereas a sport, for a fact, we have at least one round, we have at least 5 minutes, and we have at least two fighters. Whereas with art, it can be what you want it to be in that moment. So they use various martial art skills, but they don't have to use them all. It's mixed martial arts, but you could just be a wrestler and still win. You could just be a striker and still win, but you have the option.
This is interesting.
They call boxing the sweet science,
Right.
not an art.
I'm also conflicted on this when it comes to the game of chess, which maybe we'll talk about later. But let me just sort of tell you a little bit about my experience with this. Strange. I don't know what to make of it, but I grew up as a really strong uh, culture of martial arts training. Right. I began when I was like 4 or 5 years old. Um, uh, I got a black belt, close to a black belt when I was like 11, and then my master ended up dying, and I kind of took a few years break before I started another uh, martial art. Got a black belt in that, and stayed in that until I was like in my early 20s and started like teaching it. And what's interesting through that whole process, starting as a young kid all the way to my late teens, UFC and MMA became a thing. It wasn't a thing
Mm-hmm.
when I started, and it became a
Mm-hmm.
thing by the time I was older. And everybody around me really got into it. And I had this very strong aversion towards it because I felt it was a sport and not an art, and I loathed it actually in my late high school years and my early college years, and then only maybe about the past 5 or 6 years, maybe a little bit more than that, because my son's 18, 19, so probably a little earlier than that. Once he got into it, I started getting into it more, and I developed a really passion and love and enjoy it quite a bit. And that whole conversation about whether or not it's an art or sport just kind of went to the back of my mind, and I didn't even think about it really. Um, and until you actually just now brought it up, and this is kind of why I think, I don't know if our 5 minutes are up yet, but we got a pretty interesting coincidence here, because I just started reading yesterday, and in fact, I sent the text to my son to tell him, since he's interested in philosophy, he needs to read up on this reader of Noam Chomsky that has several essays about him. And I just got finished reading his summary that I sent to him about this issue of sport and U.S. Americans who are ignorant as all get out in all these other dimensions of society, but are just brilliant experts and masters of detail when it comes to a sport. Um, and
That's true.
why that's the
That's
case,
that's crazy true.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I wonder if it's interesting. And again, this is how we do this format. It's up to you to decide where we want to go with this if you
The
disagree.
five
But
minutes is up, but
yeah,
let's run with it.
that's what
Let's
I
run
think.
with it.
Concept about
Now,
sport, culture.
all right, fair enough. Now, here's my issue. So you say you came around, and it's not an issue. It's just my position. Um, yo, man, when UFC popped off, and this is just UFC, mixed martial art, the notion of backyard fights have always been around.
Yeah.
The issue of underground fights have always been around. I've seen things where, on the earliest levels of the internet, or shoot, VHS tapes, cats were pushing tapes. These were bum fights.
Yeah.
I don't know if we should be talking about that, but like homeless people fighting other homeless people,
Yeah.
and us getting, you know, you know, our kicks out of watching that. It's kind of ill, but it is what it is. So the notion of this underground fight scene has always been around. We've watched movies like Bloodsport. We've looked at martial artists, and I grew up on Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
And I look at any martial art as an artistic endeavor that's an expression of one's way of life. Now, when they brought the UFC together originally, it was one art form versus another art form. That's how it started. To go to UFC 1, and you had a guy who was a master of karate fighting a master of jujitsu.
Mm.
It was only after they realized, after multiple UFCs, maybe like UFC 3 and 4, that there was this jujitsu guy who looked like a dude that could be serving you coffee.
Right.
His name was Hoist Gracie, who
Mm-hmm.
comes from a lineage of
Right.
Gracies. And he's not even the best Gracie,
Right.
but he's iconic in that he won like the first two or three. This little goofy dude in a gi was just, attaching his body to the so-called masters of judo, masters of taekwondo, masters of boxing, and he was hemming him up. This little goofy Brazilian dude. And then that's when they realized, oh, wait a minute. I know originally it was this art form versus this art form, very blood sport style. But then it transformed into a mixed martial art style that to truly be successful in this sport, we're going to have to combine these skill sets. And now you look at everybody, and everybody has jujitsu game. Now it's not elite, or everybody has to have a stand-up game. It may not be elite, but it's come a long way. Now, what I'm ultimately getting at is, when did it become popular? And in the beginning, it wasn't. Like, the cats are still not making a lot of money. UFC became mainstream, I would argue, with the proliferation of reality TV
Mm.
and the internet. The UFC is the preeminent, premier mixed martial arts uh, enterprise. There are others, but nobody watches it.
Yeah.
And it's because UFC knows how to package what they're selling. I think why sports tend to sink in the minds of many Americans, almost to a fanatic sense, is because people have figured out a way to sell the sport. And then that leads us to you and me in our profession, in our concern. I think our educational system has done a poor job of selling our sport, our art. You know,
Yeah.
I don't look at history as something I do from 10 to 2. Yo, I lived this. When I watch a cartoon, I could see the history in it. When I watch movies, I see the history in it. When I have an experience with somebody on the road, there's history in that. So for me, it's my way of life. So it is an art for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the reasons why I was maybe turned off from it at first is because um, it was being talked about a lot and it was popular in my crowd because I grew up watching those Kimbo Slice type uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, neighborhood fighting and
Yep.
participating in some of them
Mighty,
myself.
mighty.
Uh,
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we might have been in a couple
I did
videos.
a few of them. May have uh, some scars to go with them. Uh, but um, to me, martial arts kind of like it reminds me of the great Miyamoto Musashi, who was this Ronin Japanese samurai who would go from village to village, challenging martial artists and just slaying them one by one. And he was undefeated in his life. He was also a painter, an author, and a philosopher. And so for me, going up with martial arts being something that I had to like study symbols and explain their meaning and write essays on the meaning of this form or the meaning of this style. And then seeing all these other people kind of like turn it into this sport of it's going to win or lose. There was a win or lose aspect to my martial arts. We went to tournaments, but it was to test our will, to test our strength, to test our
Right.
preparation, all this stuff. You could get very much praise if you lost or whatever. It wasn't always about the win or the lose bracket.
Mhm.
And plus, I think I had this very contrarian aspect to me as I got a little older, right? I didn't even like Eminem just because he was so popular when I was a senior in high school. And I just shut down and not really look at things. And then once my son, trying to connect with him, is interested in this, I get in it and I start to see maybe the value that I was blinded to because of my cultural lens at the time that didn't let me see the value of the sport. So I like it now, and I would say that it can be either or. I think it could be an art, or maybe people may not appreciate the art aspect of it enough. Maybe some people will, some people won't. But what's interesting to me, back to this concept of sport and U.S. culture, uh, Chomsky mentioned. I think it's the name of a book or an essay that maybe I read a long time ago called Manufacturing Consent, where he describes this attempt or this culture or entity, I guess, in US culture um, that does a really good job manufacturing our consent with the common traditional way by which we operate as a nation by uh, fueling our desire to be preoccupied with interesting things. So, in a sense, you don't feel like you can go off and do something on a world stage. You don't go and study foreign policy on a really deep level as a plumber or a even teacher of whatever, or in whatever your profession is mostly in your life. You don't go study the foreign policy or the civil social aspects of society because you really can't make much of a difference, you feel, because the institution is so powerful, and you feel maybe like, why am I going to spend all my energy on trying to do something that maybe I can't actually change because the people who are in power keep things the way they are. So why not spend all my energy on something that's a little more interesting? that I can feel like an expert in, and I can call on a radio show and completely bash a football coach's decisions and say I would have done this and I would have done that with such confidence, as if you know all this stuff, which you probably do. You have all these great points and data and all this other stuff that you've got into your mind, and you can engage a critique over something, uh, and critique the expert who's making a lot of money in it, because that you like that and you feel like that and you feel part of it, and um, this gives you a sense of enjoyment, and so you end up spending more of your time and energy learning all these stuff. And now we got something that took it to the whole game to another level, like fantasy football, where you got to spend days and nights always working through, checking out stats, knowing it even more, and you can bet on it and you can make money on it. You can get status by winning in your league, and it just turns into this entire preoccupation, which allows our society to manufacture consent, so we don't wonder why it is that the Haitian president was just overthrown, or why it is that Gaddafi was taken out, or what's going on these bigger scenes that we don't really feel we have uh, much skin in the game to affect or influence. So we put all of our energy in these other things around us.
For sure. I mean, like, look, the reality is at the end of the day, it's where is an individual placing value? I remember having a conversation in the historical underground where we went back and forth, not you and I, but I've gone back and forth with cats where they were simply, in essence, arguing sports are worthless.
Mm.
They're a waste of time. They add no value to life. It was referred to as an escape.
Yeah, in fact, you may even get that impression by reading that Chomsky stuff, in a way, maybe not worthless, but very condescending towards it, right?
I
Uh,
think I think I think it's a narrow attitude because what it implies and assumes is that everyone has your value on world affairs. So, for example, you were making reference to a plumber who may not know of the implications of, I don't know, the invasion of Ukraine or something of that nature. Now, there are individuals that take the time to study and invest and delve into that research. Why? Because those outcomes have a greater impact on what they believe to be their everyday or their future, on depending on what they value. Do they value the long game or do they value the short game? So somebody who's paying attention to the war in Ukraine, they may value a long game, meaning that I'm invested in this because in the next 10 years or so, we're going to be dealing with this, we're going to be dealing with that. Well, there might be another cat, and to no fault of their own, due to their own circumstances, everybody's a product of their environment. They may say to themselves, yo, I'm not going to be here in 5 years. As a matter of fact, I don't think long game because I happen to be a minority in America. How about I only think about what's going to happen this week? And a lot of individuals operate in that capacity. That at the end of the day, I'm trying to make it to the weekend.
yeah.
And on the weekend, I want to watch a sporting event. I want to watch a movie. And then we engage in these forms of entertainment. And then again, it's characterized as some form of like escape. But even books are escapes. Why do you read books? Well, because I want to be more knowledgeable. What do you want to be more knowledgeable? For who and for what? To impose, I mean, to express ultimately what you value, and what you value is history, or what you value is politics, or what you value is the economy. And for some individuals, they value sport, they value entertainment, um, they value the story that's usually sold with the sport. So every sport has a player, an athlete, and the athlete carries a story, a narrative that might be a microcosm of the American experience. We love the story of the what's it? Not the dark horse, but the Cinderella story in sports. And
Yeah.
like in the Cinderella story in sports is the person that wasn't supposed to make it, they
Right.
made it. And
Right.
that's such the American story. The
Yeah.
American story is I came from nothing and became something. that I was a man who's been treated like crap all throughout history because I'm black, but I won a gold medal representing this country. You know what? I'm going to throw that medal in the river. I'm going to be the most iconic athlete of a century, and my voice in that moment is not reflective of the community, because when you look at somebody like Muhammad Ali, and he was demonized, vilified for his stance that was considered very anti-American. And that leads me to this notion about how American sport is a vehicle for nationalism.
That was my next point. Yeah,
It is.
absolutely.
Because whether you're
Because
black or white, you can love American sports.
yeah, when you're talking about being at your home and wanting to watch the game, that's all fine and dandy. But then on the next level, what makes you jump up and scream when the opposing team defeats your team, or you get so angry, or you get so cheerful, even though you got, man, you always say, man, Jerry Jones over here charging you $10 for a hot dog, 15 for a beer, up to 100 to park, 500 stacks if you want to bring your family to the game. And you got so much passion, like you're a member of the team. You feel like you belong to this team.
Right.
And very powerful way of channeling this team-oriented mindset, because if you can invest as much, if you can be cool and you get the status from supporting your team, hence the bandwagon, right? You got all these little small innuendos that try to say pick your team, stick with your team, because you in life you're on this team called the United States of America, and we need your support on that team.
Even in international fights. And then just real quick, when a UFC fighter's from America and they're fighting somebody from Brazil, almost immediately you hear the crowd, because they're chaotic and drunk, USA, and it's like, what are we talking about? The Brazilian fighter has said nothing negative, Nathan, about USA. But here you are, you want to immediately turn it into this country versus that country. And it doesn't have to be that way, but that narrative is so easily accessible for the American public. It's pulp.
The best research that anyone can do on this, I can't remember the name of the documentary, but I saw it a couple years ago about the Iron Sheik. Have you seen that documentary, yo?
Nah, but I'm aware of. And first off, he's not even Iranian, but no, I think he's an Iranian Jew.
Yeah.
No,
no, he's Iranian. Yeah,
yeah, but isn't he not of Jewish descent?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Hey, yo, and with that being said, we're not going to fact check this. We're not Googling anything. I don't know if he is. I was under the impression that he was.
Yeah, no,
I could be wrong.
Persian for sure. And in fact,
yes, but not all Iranians or not all Persians are Muslim.
Right.
I mean, he's Semitic. He could be of Jewish descent.
Yeah, I don't think
he is.
But I mean, there are a few. I don't know what the percentage is, 2-3% of the Iranian population today is of Jewish descent, maybe. But I'm pretty confident from what I know, he's not. I think he's just sort of blue-blooded Persian, so to speak. He grew up in Iran, prior to the revolution. That's a fascinating documentary, by the way. It's about a lot more than wrestling and him. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Iron Sheik, maybe. But he grew up idolizing Tahdi, who was this like national hero for Persians. He was like one of the greatest wrestlers, and he was arguably, they say he committed suicide, but many people argue that the Shah had him killed because he was speaking out. And the Iron Sheik left Iran during that time period and came to the United States, and then got in the middle of this WWE culture.
Yeah.
Which, interestingly, my mother June, who never spoke any English, I only was able to communicate to her very rarely through hand gestures and food and whatnot, and a few words here and there. But she would be absolutely fascinated watching WWE. This older woman, hijab wearing, praying 3 times a day, would look and just be utterly enamored on the television by these guys going at it like they're killing each other. But if you look at those different people, they took on these national personas that
Right.
tried to really destroy each other and create these national fuels. And
Mhm.
when the little thing was over, in fact, Iron Sheik and one of the dudes, I can't even remember his name, were caught smoking crack together after they were supposed to hate each other's guts and do all this big thing, and it turned into this big, huge kind of like ordeal that showed the performative nature of WWE. Um, but it's sort of like one of those things where you probably, if you actually reflected and you were there screaming at the arena, you probably knew this wasn't real. But in the moment, you felt like it was, and you're the pure-blooded American blonde-haired guy is supposed to destroy this evil, sinister sheik who was told to take on this persona, just like Wahoo McDaniels was supposed to take on a persona, just like all these other different racialized groups were supposed to take on this persona, which kind of shows that sport, and I would say always, maybe not always, but at least since the late 19th century, when boxing becomes powerful, gymnastics becomes powerful, and it becomes blended with this masculine kind of uh, crisis of masculinity that the country was going through as they were preparing for war with Spain and all this other stuff. Maybe earlier, but I would pinpoint that as being the time period when sport became a reflection of this national sentiment, and it may have just been continuously evolving into a form of propaganda that the state is able to use to manufacture consent. It's worth exploring. However, this is interesting. I should point out, I say these things not to tell everybody to stop joining and supporting their sports, because actually, I was a big football player. Out of high school, I played in the semi-pro league for a while. I managed the team. I played on the team. I coached the team. Uh, all of this stuff. And then when I transferred to UTA and became enamored in history and became a scholar, instead of spending hours playing every Madden, 2002 was the last one. I threw all of it away. I threw away my TV. I stopped listening. I just stopped watching football. I stopped watching basketball. I started like condemning it, very similar to the way Chomsky kind of
Mhm.
talks about it in these ways. And I went decades without that. Then my son, here he is. I mentioned to you about the UFC stuff, but also basketball. My son really liked basketball. So I started getting back into following basketball as a way to connect with my son. And
Mhm.
now I'm I'm all in again. I love basketball. And
You want to
this
know why?
this really,
Not to interrupt. Not to. Yeah, the reason why is because your 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 circle of belonging changed. So when you go to UTA, your circle for belonging were academics, and you and your drive compelled you to want to be the best of the best. So you went all in, and you have that discipline because of what you've learned growing up with martial arts, and you committed yourself to academia. And now that your circle has changed a bit, and what I mean by that is because your boy has
mm,
grown up, and in an effort to foster that circle, that relationship, you are now embracing some of the things that he takes in that his interests, which happen to be sport, because he's now an athlete as you once were, and so now you're back into it. So what it shows is that all of us, we tend to, in an effort to belong, will adjust our scope and our interests. You know, the things that I bring up in lecture, I would never bring them up when I'm having a conversation with my folks, because I understand that that's my audience, and I have to be in tune. In order for me to properly communicate with that audience, I have to be in tune with that audience. You know, for you to be properly in tune in academia, as Chomsky would want all of us to be informed citizens, we have to be in tune with historical readings or reading in general. For you to be in tune with your son, you have to be aware of, hey, I know who Charles Du Bronx Oliveira is. I know who Habib Nagaminov is, you know? And so that's
yeah,
all it is.
great
It's
point. That's a
you,
good point.
it's you belonging.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And you know what? I think it also shows, or that journey that, and this is a proof that I think sometimes life experience is key to learning, which is why students should never just give up in the moment, because you don't know how much time and experience is going to open and unlock wisdom. And so through this experience, going through this all, I've come to realize that you don't have to not like sports to be an academic, or you don't have to not like books to be a great sportsman. Um, and we have a tendency when we're on these teams, when we're on these surroundings, when I was on the campus hanging out with the Noam Chomskys, to otherize those who are outside of what you're doing. And so I I left. I pushed them away. My friends and everybody who I was down with are now those people wasting their time, and I'm here, right?
Mhm.
And I need this. I need to focus on this, and I don't have time for this stuff. So I got rid of it all. But now, when you come back full circle, and I'm still in the game of academics, I'm still writing and reading and publishing and doing all these things, but I'm also back in. I don't spend much time on football anymore, but basketball, actually, you would say I'm more in tune with what's going on in basketball now than I was back then, when it was more like what football was then is what it is, what basketball is today. But I didn't have to give anything up to invest time in here. And I think that's an important lesson for us to learn, is that oftentimes we are portrayed, when we're thinking about stuff, as an either or dichotomy, when that's a false dichotomy. And
Absolutely. And we see
so
that in politics too.
yeah, 100%, man, 100%,
And
especially right.
that's our problem, that it has to be all or nothing. I'm on this side, I'm on this tribe, you're on that tribe.
Yeah,
There's no room for us to break bread.
man. In fact, that what you just said, a great example of that occurred in class this week, actually, when I was talking about the rise of fascism, and I was talking about the components to fascism, and how one of the components is to look to the glory days, to make greatness reappear, be great again, and I was sort of subliminally hitting home all of these shots at the orange one, and however, right after that, I made it a point to talk about how Trump uh, is probably the best, most brilliant marketer the presidential cabinet has ever seen. Look what he did with Twitter, something very similar to what Roosevelt did with fireside chats. The way Trump can reduce people to one or two words that always stick in your mind. Like, I'll never forget Lion Ted. I'll never forget Pocahontas. I'll never forget uh, Little Marco. And when I mentioned this, a student who really enjoys the left wing type
For
of
sure.
jabs that I hit was shocked. Oh, why are you saying this?
Right.
Like, how dare you mention something beneficial, or some
Positive.
positive quality about this vicious monster? Um, and so it was, well, it's not really like a positive or negative thing. It's a observation of greatness. It's an observation of the ability for someone to do something. It's like when I tell you that Stalin was the greatest leader, dictator of all time. That doesn't mean I'm saying he's good or bad. What I'm saying is that he was able to accomplish
Right.
something more,
And
right?
they would make the argument along the lines that, well, you shouldn't even give him that type of credit, because that might plant a seed of some type of positivity within the mind of somebody who will then run with it and do this and do that. And that's ultimately where a lot of this lies,
Yeah.
where we feel that if we say anything that gives merit or fruit to something, that we're more afraid of the potential than the reality. And that's where we're stuck at, I think, in a lot of areas, is that um that we're in such a state of fear that we limit any possibility of outside of the box art, outside of the box thinking, because we're afraid of the potential consequence. Now, What are the consequences? They're there. Go ask Ye. The
Mm-hmm.
consequences are there. Go ask Ann Hutchinson. The
Mm-hmm.
consequences are there. Go ask Roger Williams. The consequences are there. Go ask Dr. King, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali. These are individuals that had unconventional thoughts, and the outcomes were not positive. And I think, we find individuals. There's a movie that I don't like, but I love the quote. There was a little boy who was coming up to Achilles in this movie, Troy.
Wow.
So Achilles comes out of his tent and they're calling for him. They're like, Achilles, Achilles. And the boy's like, oh my goodness, Achilles, I don't understand how you can just get up and go and fight so valiantly and knowing that this could happen or that could happen. And then Achilles smiles and laughs and then looks at him and he goes, and that's why no one will ever remember your name.
Mm.
That's why no one will ever remember your name, because we live in this state of, not only do I not understand you, I am so concerned about the potential, I don't even want to carry the risk.
Mm.
The
Interesting.
greater the risk, the greater the reward, and more often the case. That's why I'm over here eating a Wendy's 4 for 4. I don't risk much. I play it safe, and and the cats that play it safe, they. But that's only, again, if you value what the risk is giving you, which is money, fame, or whatever someone tends to value. I don't value those things, so it doesn't bother me as much.
That's right. That's real talk. I'll put a footnote in there, however, for another conversation at some point, that you actually are probably doing yourself a lot more harm and going way beyond by eating all that nasty food references. So we're gonna have to get on a food conversation at one point. Uh,
I
everything else,
know, but it's
they get
so convenient.
on point.
That's the
Um,
problem.
yeah, man. So like that's interesting. Sport. So the moral, I think, of this conversation is to be open. Is to um, I would also maybe point out that those people that you mentioned as being outliers, or their ideas, kind of like those unconventional ideas. I think it's important to understand that there are unconventional ideas that are well before their time, that are brilliant, that society can't see yet. And then there
Oh,
are
for
unconventional
sure.
ideas that are just completely asinine and stupid, and idiotic.
One thing,
So,
real quick, Brad. I don't want to interrupt, but one thing, man, it's brilliant, almost kind of like how this does come full circle. In that, the question we started off with, is it a sport or is it an art?
mm,
And then now we're finding ourselves having a conversation about, why can't it be both?
yeah,
Why can't why can't it be a sport and an art? Why can't it be an art and a science?
right.
You know, when I look at some of the greatest scientists, a theoretical physicist like, what's that dude's name? Miku, is it Miku Chaku? I forget his name. Is the Asian, uh
On TV all the time.
yeah.
Wormhole
Michu.
talking, dude. Talk about wormhole. Yeah, I know you're talking
Whatever
about.
his I don't know what his name is. Michikaku is his name. I'm sorry. Michikaku. You ask him, hey, what's your area of expertise? I'm an area of expertise in string theory. Well, what is that? And he'll go off on it. And then, but he always compares it to art.
Mm,
He's a scientist, and we will all look at him as a scientist, but he sees himself as an artist. And then if you go look at your greatest artist, they're crazy meticulous. Meticulous. You look at somebody like Kobe Bryant, who's a basketball phenom. You can't deny the scientific approach he takes to studying the game. He's a student of the game. Go look at LeBron. He studies his body. He's meticulous about preserving his body. Tom Brady the same way. Russell Wilson the same way. Your exceptional individuals will not relegate themselves to say, I'm a scientist or I'm an artist. They always usually tend to be both.
yeah, I think that's a great point, and it makes me think that uh, there's a recipe to make it both. They don't have to be both. You can be just
Right.
one, but the
Yes, for
recipe
sure.
Yeah, and the recipe is that intentionality. So chess is a science until you start intentionally going so crazy into it that you begin to come up with creative ways to defeat your opponent. Once you get into that realm of creativity, now it becomes art. Kobe Bryant mastered the science so much that he began to creatively do things that others could not do, pushing boundaries, taking it to frontiers. He made it an art. And I think that's really the key is here. You can treat something like a science and just stick to what you know and do the basics and follow the code and play your role, or you can also become such a master of the role that you can play that role subconsciously without even thinking about it, which frees your mind to add new components and think creatively to the steps to create something new, which adds the element of art.
I would argue that is the artistic part of it all. Like
Yeah,
the foundational part might be the science. Man, we've played chess with a bunch of people, and we play each other as well. I've played robots.
yeah,
You know, there's some cats that are chess players, but they're robots,
yeah,
meaning that the board has to be this way. I have to sit here, and I know without even me moving, they already know their next move.
right,
They're robots.
yeah,
The art would be, as you mentioned, that you have such a mastery of the science. You you ultimately design. You become a designer of moves. You become a designer of math. In that you're formulating new equations, new algorithms, and that there's scientific design, and then that would be the ultimate art form. Um, uh, you know, this evolution of man, which might involve the inclusion of science, the fusion of science.
yeah.
You
That's
know, because
interesting.
people are going to say, well, I can design, I can have designer babies. Well, how do you do that? Well, through science. When I manipulate science, I can pick this gene and I can splice it with that gene, and we can make sure that these genes are in this test tube, and now we have a child with which has a higher propensity for this and that because of those genes.
Yeah, I think that's good. So I think then we've come to the conclusion, maybe, I don't know, uh, that a sport, that term is more synonymous with the scientific aspect of something, and art is
Yes.
more synonymous with the creative aspect of something.
In the
Uh,
midst of sport, it's
in
usually
the midst of
observed.
that science, yeah, and that's why it's so brilliant when you can achieve. You know, it reminds me of that they did this on Breaking Bad, which I hate to mention because it's not one of my favorite shows. There's a lot of problems with it, but there are some good moments in that show as well. But when Jesse is talking to Mr. White about how this is an art, man, you make the best meth in the world. You're an artist, and Mr. White's like, what are you talking about, man? This is science. It's basic. All you got to do is learn this stuff, and you got the formula down. But what he didn't realize as an outsider coming into this meth game that many people are distributing and getting involved in, and the people who consume it and all these other, there's all of these different dimensions that this man, as a science teacher, didn't come to at the beginning of
Okay.
the seasons. And then by the end of the seasons, uh, he clearly thinks of it as an art. He's trying to
Mhm.
become the most successful. He's trying to vie and reach the top, and he doesn't want to let go of his product. This is my product. It's not very scientific if it's yours and you created it and you owned it and you came up with the steps. Now he sees it as an art, something that he wants to control and protect and things like that. Even though he doesn't even mention it, you can see the evolution of that. I think pretty well in that.
Notice they were at opposite ends of the spectrum because they had different value systems.
Mm.
Notice by their interaction, their circles of influence changed, and then one became the other became the one. Very similar to you and your boy.
Yeah.
You at opposite end of the spectrum regarding sports and the value of them, but the more and more you interacted, one became the other. This what's his name, Mr. White character?
Yeah.
He's the meth guy, right? He saw
Yeah.
it as a science,
Mm-hmm.
and the more
Yeah.
and more he interacts, I've never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
My mom loved it. The more and more he interacts with Jesse,
Mm-hmm.
it appears that he begins to uh, commandeer the notion that, you know what, maybe this is an art.
Mm-hmm.
That exposure, and then you begin to see the subtle. And here's another thing. Well, I don't want to be dismissive towards science. The art, there's some subtlety to it. Now, I'm not sure if there's subtlety to science because I'm naive to a lot of science, but maybe there is.
Oh, very.
As Michikaku argues, there is an art. There is a subtlety of art in science.
Yeah, and you get into it. One of the best courses I ever took as an undergrad, I had a bachelor's in philosophy as well as a bachelor's in history, and it started out with philosophy is what gravitated me towards academics. And one of my best class I ever took was the philosophy of science. And when you take the philosophy of science or the philosophy of mathematics or the philosophy of anything for that matter that you consider to be pure science and objective,
Mhm.
you start to see actually that there is a realm of subjectivity to it. And once you start dabbling into the realm of subjectivity, you're moving towards art.
Right.
And so you don't really get to the philosophy of something until you've reached a high level, right? It's no coincidence that PhD stands for a doctorate. I don't have a doctorate in history. I
Right.
am a doctor of philosophy,
Philosophy.
right? So the key is that you're supposed to study all the scientific stuff, the memorization, the stuff like that here. And then once you reach a certain level, you begin to dabble into the interpretation and perspective and how the industry is built and what big systems and people and creative minds do to establish these larger, like Aristotelian scientific model or the Newtonian scientific model or
Mhm.
the Einsteinian scientific model. And you see how there are these factors behind social human beings that build these scientific structures in the first place. And that's where we get into the whole concept of art, I think.
Yeah, maybe. And again, art is so subjective, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I go look at this painting, you go look at that painting. I'm like, all right, it's a dog playing poker. And but for somebody that has value, and but maybe it's because I have such a um, I don't even want to give him credit and say that it's a higher level appreciation for art. It's just a different. It's a different difference of values. You value it more, so you study it more. Therefore, you know a little bit more, and therefore you have a different look on it more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know what? You probably are smarter than I am on art, and that should be okay. You know, if I, you know, if you, I've had fine, I even when it comes to food, like I went to this very nice restaurant, and it was supposed to be like the best Italian restaurant in Dallas. It took forever to get the reservation. We went there, and I ate it, and I'm like, man, if we don't go to Olive Garden real quick and get some real lasagna, like, but that's my unfortunate palate, unsophisticated palate. Maybe I don't have an artistic palate for fine dining, and if that's the case, save my wallet.
Mm-hmm.
Save. I like Fazoli's. I like Olive Garden. I like, but at the same time, I just told you I eat 4 for 4. So
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, okay. I think we've got this down. This sport, science, or art. But what about sport in the ancient world? Um, I don't know much about it because I'm not too much of an ancient historian, but I've taken a few classes and studied a lot about some of them, like the gladiatorial games, which one may argue whether or not is a sport or is it a spectacle, or again maybe there's not an either or.
So we can trace back a lot of sports, like for Native Americans, they played like this earlier version of what we now know lacrosse. I was watching this tribe in Africa. They were engaged in this combat sport where they're flinging these large sticks at each other, and ultimately, if you lose, then you lose favor within the tribe, and then the ladies won't think that you're man enough to be with them. So the purpose of the sports, I think back in the day, it depends on um like your community. So if there's a reason for sport to be utilized by the powers, like for example in gladiator sports, um, I think Chomsky has the same perspective as to why the Romans would use gladiator sports, and that was to distract the public from them losing a war or misspending or any type of things that were going on in their everyday lives, because you could
Are you not
distract.
entertained?
Exactly. Whereas in a sport in that African tribe, that's used to kind of designate, who will I share my life with? Who will I start a family with? Who will be respected in this community? And so you see tribes engage in those type of sports, and I
That's
think it just
interesting
very
because that what that suggests then is that there may be this, maybe for lack of better words, I don't like to use universal human things, but there may be this universal attraction or broad human attraction to this, to sporting, that then the structure of a society can then utilize however it sees fit to further its manufacturing of consent. So, for example, the Mayan ancient ball court, which was a sport,
right.
right? Huge arena, and it had this 10-pound leather ball that they hit with their hips into hoops, and the losing team was sacrificed and got and got the axe. And so you could sort of argue that there is a religious component to their sporting game that reflected the significant religiosity of Mayan life and the multiple polytheistic gods and how each god plays a particular role, and there's literally gods that are holding up the earth and spending their days sweating it out, holding it so that you can survive. So if you believe that, then maybe your sports, which people like because they're competitive, they're interesting, they're fun, they're whatever, and so you develop a sport that fits your worldview of what
For
these guys
sure.
are doing, so that you can
Yeah.
system
I
going.
mean, I mean, the reality is that sports can be many things, and for sure, sports have been used to perpetuate a narrative. To talk about the Mayans, that like, well, there's a religiosity to their sport because it's paying homage to this god or that god, and ultimately your position in the world. In God bless America in almost every sport that's played, the national anthem. Um, you see
Yeah,
the people stand up and saluting a flag. Um, and I would almost argue that when you see the development of professional sports in America, this is at the turn of the earliest 19th century, right? We
right.
begin to see more and more Americans going to baseball games, going to boxing events.
Late 19th.
Um,
Yeah,
uh, I apologize. Yes,
yeah,
late 19th century, early 1900s.
right.
Um, this is also at the beginning of nations engaging with each other internationally. And so, America,
Am I wrong? Samari talked about this in one of his deals with the underground. That's also the time in which the Olympics were brought back, right? So the
yeah,
Greek Olympic Games kind of went dormant for several centuries, and if I'm not mistaken, again, we're not fact checking, but I think it was the late 19th century when we
yeah.
saw the resurgence of this.
Well, because we're now beginning to see nations interacting with each other more than we've ever seen them before. 1898 is the year that marks U.S. imperialism. We're fighting Spain. We're acquiring Hawaii. We're in the Philippines. European nations are trying to figure out what to do with Africa. We're finding our way into China with open door notes. So this notion of imperialism is presenting itself. More and more Americans are finding out about other countries for once. I mean, how else would they? We see, and then we have these national sports to kind of reclaim and reassert, hey, you belong to this country. We're playing this sport in this country,
Right.
and this will become our national pastime.
Yeah.
Baseball, you know, boxing, where it's our country versus your country, and in some cases, it's our color versus your color.
Right.
The great white hype.
Yeah.
You know, that's
John.
not the bronze bomber.
Yeah.
You have Jack Johnson,
Right.
who was,
Unforgivable blackness.
yeah, and at the end of the day, after beating up every person that they threw in front of him, he went home with the white wife
Right.
and letting everybody know,
Right.
my wife is white. What you gonna do? And
Right.
he'd knock you out. You know, so like sports, and people were enthralled by that because of the human narrative. There's a national narrative that goes along with it. It's not until I mean, I could be wrong. Again, no fact check, but maybe like the 1950s or so, we start using the national anthem.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's a lot later.
Or that's when they instill "In God We Trust" in the national anthem in the
Right,
19th.
right.
It started. It was earlier that they started doing it. In fact, the national anthem in the 1930s used to be conducted with the "Hail Hitler" sign, but then when Hitler appropriated that, they switched it up to "Hand Over the Heart." Uh,
Man,
so,
maybe not cool.
but a little bit earlier, I do think it's still like early 1900s probably.
Sure.
Going to be worth looking into though. Absolutely. Yeah, man. Sport and agenda. It seems that there is this um, agenda maybe that societies, the hegemonic forces of the society, the controlling stake in society, those in charge, can
I
use.
mean, it can be for
Can be.
sure.
Doesn't
I
have to
mean,
be.
I
Can be.
don't think that there are Illuminati forces in the dart leagues.
Right.
You know,
But
I don't
on
think that.
the other hand, there are how many people boycotting the NFL because the dude decided to take a knee, right? And so they don't have to
Certain
be,
sports, not
but
all
they
sport.
certainly are for people, right? And that comes into this awareness why you got to be, you don't think dichotomously to create a word, maybe. Back to my wisdom that I learned through experience of abandoning my love for sports because I thought it was necessary to be an academic and then coming back to it, right? If you're aware of these things, then you can protect yourself from the sinister elements of a thing that society uses to manipulate you.
Yeah, and I think that that's manipulation right there. Is where, why can't you be many things?
Right,
Why could you be an athlete who's also a historian, who also loves Wu-Tang Clan, who also loves the WNBA, who
right,
also loves to cook, who also loves to grow? Why can't you be all these things?
right.
And you can.
You can.
You
It's
are.
society does a good job uh, getting us to think that we can't, which in fact, actually, I've been searching and thinking about what the heck kind of quote am I going to use
I
for our
got one.
talk. Okay, you
I
get
got
one
one.
too, but let me just use this one because this won't
Go
be a
ahead.
quote for the day, but it'll be a quote that what you just said, or what this whole thing reminds me of. CeeLo Green in one of his songs on Goody Mob's first album, Soul Food, says that the system is designed to keep your third eye blind, but not in a sense that your other two eyes can't see. So you end up spending quality time in places you don't even need to be. And I think that fits really well in a sense that there are these cracks. By the system is designed to keep your third eye blind. What they do is they throw these cracks, and they know you can easily jump over those cracks if you're paying attention to them. But they know that there are enough people in society who aren't going to see the cracks. They're going to fall through them, and so it'll work. In other words, we know that we can be all of these things at once, but the forces in society also know that many people don't realize this. And if they can set the game up with holes around it that you fall into, because you ain't seeing how you can be multiple things, then they can continue to perpetuate the agenda with the entity that they're utilizing it to do this with.
You see what's dope about that? And here again, like, so you're listening to CeeLo Green, who's a member of Goody Mob, a rap group from the early 90s, or 90s and early 2000s, maybe, from the South. You found Chomsky in him.
Mm.
And we see CeeLo Green and Chomsky. They're saying the same thing.
Right.
They're saying the same thing. I was so my favorite rapper is Nas. I'm watching one of his music videos. And before the music video starts, it's like a street anthem. Everybody should know it. It's called Made You Look. Before the music video starts, and the song's called Made You Look. There's a quote. And it says, if you can walk with the crowd and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance, then run. Yours is the earth and everything in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. And the ability to be a commoner, but walk amongst kings. The ability to be many things is what I take from it. Is that I should, man, if I love history, I should be able to love history, and I should be able to also love hip hop. That they're not mutually exclusive. That we can be inclusive of so many art forms, that to relegate ourselves to only one, that I cannot be a man of many things, then I will ultimately inherit the earth. That all is mine to inherit. And where do I get that from? I get that from watching Nas tear it up.
That's great. It's a great quote. It's a great ending there. Yeah. I'll just add, since the last word of that quote was "son," we'll add a little a Wu-Tang phrase for those of you who don't know. I call myself son because I shine like one. Yeah, that's great. That's dope. I like that.
Yeah, I take what we do for a living. Sometimes it's science. Sometimes I think it's more art. Yeah, but maybe because I like to feel that I'm at this elevated sense of my delivery. But
I mean, when you think of history like art, this may be one of the reasons why we students tend to enjoy our classes more so than the traditional boring historian who every one of my students come into my classes. One of the first things you're always going to hear them say is, man, I didn't realize that history was so much about interpretation and perspective and all these subjective aspects that are in that realm of art, because so many people have taught them that history is this. On this day, this happened. Mm-hmm. On this day, this happened. And they just keep regurgitating facts as instead of reading it and developing it like a developmental process that's open to interpretation and perspective and artistic elements. And that could be
and that's because their new circle includes you.
Right.
And you have a different value on it. They came in with that value. You've now showed them a different value. And before you know it, they're going to be looking at you saying, man, you know what? This is art. The same way that Jesse was telling Mr. White, yo, this is awesome meth.
Right.
Or I'm sorry, this is art.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's absolutely right. And it also empowers them to want to look at it in these different ways. Yeah, all good stuff. I think we probably went past our limit, huh?
A little bit.
Right on, man.
We're all good.
Appreciate everybody for spending the time listening to us. We'll be back next Monday with another episode.
All right. I'll holler at you. Peace.